Welcome back to our series on rhetorical analysis. We're going to continue our study of the analysis of the FIDs. Today we're going to look at imagery and how an author uses imagery to create a particular effect on his or her audience. Imagery is language that appeals to the five senses. So we are talking about, of course, language that describes what we hear, so auditory types of language, which includes music, silence, noise. We're going to include tactile types of imagery. So this would be description that has to do with how things touch or feel. We're going to talk about taste. So this would be how an author uses taste to help describe a particular situation, place, or thing. This will include smell, of course, and the most obvious, of course, is what we see. So these five senses, when they are being appealed to in writing, we're talking about imagery. So let's remember the four basic steps of writing an analysis piece. Number one is that you need to make sure that you include or you identify the technique that you're talking about. So in this case, we're talking about imagery, so you're going to want to make sure that you identify something in the piece that you're writing about and labeling it ultimately as a type of imagery. Along with that, you got to make sure that you include the context. You've got to summarize the part of the text that contains the example that you're going to provide as an example of imagery. So this could be really short. This could be something where you just tell us what page number it's on or what part of the story or essay you're referring to. You got to make sure that you ground the reader in what it is you're talking about and where the example that you're about to provide is in the text. And then of course you've got to actually provide that example. So here you're going to use quotation marks and pull some portion of the text out for the reader so they can see exactly what you're talking about. So you're going to want to quote specific words, phrases, sometimes full sentences that represent, in this case, imagery. And then the most important part of your analysis, of course, is the actual analysis, the actual discussion part. And so here you need to discuss the significance of this example that you actually put in your analysis piece, and you need to highlight the effect that the author seems to be trying to achieve by using this particular device. And so here are a series of questions that you might try to answer that will help you with your analysis. What is the intended effect on the audience of the provided example? How does the strategy usually work? How is the strategy working in this specific example? Why did the author use this particular strategy on this particular audience? As we know, audience is very important. How is the audience supposed to feel? How is the audience supposed to react when they read this? What is the audience supposed to think? And then the big thing at the end, in what way does this stylistic device enhance the author's overall purpose? Okay, let's take a look at a portion of a paragraph that a student of mine wrote once about imagery. And what you're going to find here is that writing about imagery is not all that different from writing about diction. This particular piece is writing about a portion from a Stephen King book, which, if you know Stephen King, very descriptive, and he's definitely trying to create a particular tone. Most of the time, King is trying to create a dark and ominous tone. Here, he's kind of doing the opposite. So here's an example of imagery where he's describing a carnival in a particular scene, and it goes like this. So the writer writes, "The carnival, quote, smells of popcorn and cotton candy, and children on roller coasters laugh as the wind whips their tangled hair." Here, Stephen King's imagery. You can see that we've labeled the technique. Here, Stephen King's imagery helps to create a tone of nostalgia. While he is known for creating terrifying scenes of death and destruction, here he chooses to focus on children and images that harken the past. Popcorn and cotton candy are treats typically associated with parades and festivals, happiness and innocence. These images are easily relatable for readers who, King undoubtedly hopes, will remember happy times with their parents going to such events as children. So, what we've got here, and it's not in the exact order that I pointed out just a second ago, it doesn't have to be, but all four parts are here. We've got the identification of the technique, its imagery. We have some context, tells us where he is writing this. So he's talking about the carnival scene, and maybe earlier in this paragraph tells us what chapter that's in, for instance. In addition to that, we have some specifics. We have some quoted material here. We've quoted this line that he's written in this portion of the text, and this particular line as well. And these are important because later on in the actual analysis part, the discussion part, which you can see is the most, which is the biggest part that he's written about, the writer talks about his use of popcorn and cotton candy and the wind whipping and the tangled hair. So we've got a smell here, we've got the sounds here, we've got the touch here. All three of these things make this imagery. And then this writer talks about what those particular things, how those particular things create a particular tone. Okay? So you're going to see here, this is kind of the key line here. How are most of the audience likely, what's the audience most likely to think about when they think about popcorn and cotton candy? And this is a pretty logical explanation of what they're likely to think about, and Stephen King knows this. So again, your job is to talk about how the writer's language choices create a particular effect. And here, the writer has talked about how Stephen King's language choice of imagery, and specifically these lines, create this tone of nostalgia. You can't just say that, you then have to explain it, and that's what the analysis is all about. Simple as that.